Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
James Walker here from the Brisbane Lions.
Jason Johannesson from the Western Bulldogs.
Luke Parker here from the Sydney Swans.
It's Rory Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Max Gawn, Melbourne Football Club.
This is Matt Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
You heard his name as a part of the intro. Max Gawn is who we're talking about today in the 50 most relevant. Number 5. Maybe for you that's too high because of what happened just a few weeks ago. But one way or another, whether you choose to start with him or not, there's a fairly safe bet you're going to want Max in your fantasy footy side when you get to a completed team. Helping me talk about Max, the big superstar ruckman, I've got Benny Gogos. Hello, mate. How are you?
Hey, mate. Going very well. Very excited to speak about Big Max today.
Well, we gave you a big one just yesterday in Matty DeBoer, and Max Gawn is not too far away from being an absolute superstar of the fantasy footy community, not just of the past 2 years, but likely yet again in 2020. Still just the 28 years old, this ruckman has a ceiling that when we look at our rucks, Brodie Grundy's the only real guy that can hit the same level of ceiling consistently. Last year, he saved his best score for the final round of the year, and that's where you like it, isn't it? It was a 154 against the Kangaroos in AFL Fantasy, while it was an insane 212 in SuperCoach that same game. An average of just 111 was his seasonal best in AFL Fantasy, while another year in the high 120s, 128 in Supercoach. He's pricey, but oh my friends, he's worth every cent. Just a touch under 700,000 in Supercoach, just over 800,000 in DreamTeam, and 826,000 in AFL Fantasy. And Ben, when we look back at the 2019 season from the Melbourne Football Club, safe to say it was one they will want to forget very, very quickly, but it wasn't because of a down season from Max Gawn. He was sensational yet again last year for us.
Absolutely. He was very, very dominant once again. There was really no down in his performance, and you couldn't say that for very many members of the Melbourne Footy Club. I think Clayton Oliver was another guy that kind of maintained his output, but you go back and you look through the numbers from the 2018 to the 2019 season, it's incredible. It's almost like they are a different set of players. So Gawn was one of those guys that really maintained his output, and he started to add a few strings to the bow. He's just such a brilliant player in and amongst the rock contest these days. I think we're speaking off air just before, and the beauty with Max Gawn is in DreamTeam, you pretty well know guaranteed he's going to have about 40 points from hit outs alone. Even more so in Supercoach, given he's so good at making those positive outcomes for the Melbourne Footy Club. So he's just a great player, and he had another phenomenal 2019 season.
Yeah, he did 21 games last year. He averaged 39 hit-outs, 18 possessions, 6 score involvements, 5 marks, 5 clearances. He was 3rd across the entire league for hit-outs and 7th in the league for total contested marks. Yeah, he's not just dominant in and around the stoppages, but he's also a really strong guy, both when they need him to go forward and create a forward target, but also around the grounds and in the back line when they need that help. He's got no problems clunking big marks. Kicking for goal, an area of growth for Big Maxi. But in terms of clunking the Dukes, he's got no problems with doing that. If you look across his AFL Fantasy and Dream Team numbers, an average of 111. Not bad through there. 16 tons from his 21 games. Of those tons, he translated 9 of them into scores over 120. And of course, that big 150-plus score to wrap up the season. Additionally important through this really high, strong ceiling and frequency is a guy that really won't hurt you with just the 2 scores below 80 all season. He just didn't hurt you. And in one of those games, he actually rolled his ankle quite severely early in the second quarter, was pretty much off the ground for the rest of that quarter, and then was plonked forward for the vast majority of the game from that point on. So really, while it is in there and it did impact the average, it's really just the one game that he struggled to go over 80 in AFL Fantasy last year, and that was round 1 against Port Adelaide.
Yeah, it's funny as well because there was obviously question marks on him in the preseason heading into 2019 with Braden Bruce having arrived and everyone was expecting this. Preece is a great ruckman. Everyone was expecting him to sort of be a key member of the team, given that he made the move over. That didn't eventuate as possibly was somewhat predictable. But yeah, we're all a little bit concerned, but the concerns were certainly unwarranted.
Yeah, no, there were.
He's become a fantastic player. I mean, I know I've got a fair few friends that actually played footy with him down in his Ormond days as a junior footballer, and you heard some very interesting stories about his attitude towards football back then. And I can comfortably say that it's almost incredible, the transformation now, where he's just an ever reliable leader of that midfield division for Melbourne. And I think again in 2020 he's going to be a leader for our fantasy sides, especially as a potential captain option on a weekly basis.
Yeah, just like he's rumoured to be one of the either sole or joint captains for Melbourne, he's a great leader for us in every single format of the game. In SuperCoach, he's even better. An average of 128. That is the second year in a row he's been up around that area. 18 tons from his 21 games. It's insane. Of those, 13 are over 120 and 4 over 150, including that 2-1-2. And just like in SuperCoach, just the 2 scores really dropping beneath the marker that we really need it to be. He had 3 scores all year that he didn't turn up. One was injury impacted. The other was an 87 and a 99. Week in and week out, he gets it done. And yeah, you're right. If you started the year without Maxi Gawn and thinking, you get to that round 1 game, that's 68 in DreamTeam and Fantasy, 87 in SuperCoach, you're taking him on, you're thinking, this is exactly the way I want it to go. Then the next time he didn't turn up in SuperCoach was round 15. He just went 116, 126, 113, 126, 145, 127, 109, 144, 149, 158, 153, 151. Nothing like to lull you into a false sense of security, is it, with Big Max? Because not only did he do it last year, he's done it in 2018. That year in AFL Fantasy, 18 tons across that format, 5 over 150. And again, just the 2 scores beneath 90. In SuperCoach, it's very, very similar in terms of how that translated across for us. Year in, year out, he gets great frequency of tons, great ceiling of tons, and he is a genuine captaincy option against anyone in a Dream Team in a SuperCoach format.
Absolutely, mate. Commendable effort getting through all those high numbers there. That was quite impressive. But he's been absolutely fantastic. I mean, I could wax lyrical about him for days. I think we all know as a fantasy community just how good he is these days. He's been very, quite durable over the past 24 months. He had 1 season where he was injured, but prior to that, he'd been dominant as well. So he's really been quite a dominant ruck for the past 4 years. We know what we're going to get with Max Gawn. He's fantastic, and I think there's only positives we can say. Of course, in the pre-season, he's injured his knee, which is where the discussion becomes a little bit more interesting.
Yeah, it does. It's safe to say things didn't go his way in the pre-season is probably an understatement. At a pre-season training camp, injured his knee. Thank goodness it wasn't as severe as it could have been, knowing he's had 2 ACL injuries before in his career. But just a strained medial ligament, which is a positive for us in terms of it's far, nowhere near as invasive as it could have been for a knee injury or as long term. And he's no certainty to be named round 1 either. At this stage, he's touch and go for the final of the Marsh preseason games, let alone also then as we venture into round 1. He's no certainty, but he's running at the moment, not at full pace, but he's certainly running. And at time of recording, the club and he are really adamant that he should be right to go for round 1. I suppose, Ben, you could look at it in 2 ways, and both are perfectly adequate. One, he's now likely to be much more unique than he was a month ago as a starting squad option. The other, I suppose, is he now could start a little slower and be a nice upgrade target.
Absolutely, and this really follows on very nicely from our Matt DeVore conversation yesterday. So kind of what we alluded to a little bit was if you select someone like a Patrick Cripps or in this case, and Max Gawn, both of them average around that 110 in DreamTeam and Fantasy. You really need them to be probably outperforming that number over the first 6 weeks for it to be a huge success. So they probably need to do 120, maybe even 130 over that initial
to hold the value
period. To hold the value, and also to be quote unquote a successful selection in the sense that, okay, you guys know that they're probably going to average 110 or thereabouts for the season, but you're getting their good period of scoring right at the start of the year. So I think with Max Gawn, we now strongly under the impression that we're not going to get that fierce scoring run from the get-go. So that would initially make you think, okay, look, we're not going to start with him. We're going to wait for his price to drop. The problem with that as well is that we then start to get a backlog of players that we want to be bringing in at round 6, round 5, and we're only going to have so much money. I mean, that's not when our cows aren't necessarily fattened by that time. You might have one cow that you're willing to cull. You might have one upgrade, but really it's more around that round 8 period. And look, there's every case to be made that Max Gawn starts a bit slow. He might have 2 or 3 weeks where he struggles a little bit. I also don't think that his downside is as high as, say, a midfielder that potentially gets tagged by Matt DeBoer, because as we were speaking about before with his hit-outs, he can get 40, 50 points from the hit-outs alone. So his low score is probably his basement scoring is going to be 80, 90. In SuperCoach, given what you just told me before, that's about his basement might be around the 100 mark. So it's pretty interesting from that perspective, and you start to think, well, hey, if he's a little bit unique, heading into, say, round 3, round 4, he's maybe done a little bit less than what's expected, but then he starts to really fire up. It might be a little bit difficult for people to bring him in. Look, naturally, my feeling is, and the way I'd sort of view it at the moment is that I would probably be keener on upgrading to him. Yeah. But it's definitely a debate that people have got to work through, because I can see this going a couple of ways, where he might have two weeks where he's slightly below average, and then he really heats up and you struggle to bring him in.
Yeah, it's a really good point, isn't it?
Completely possible.
Yeah,
absolutely, mate.
Because you're right. How many of these guys can you take on and then get at that price? I'm seeing a lot of people choose to go, I'll get Lloyd cheaper, or I'll get Dusty cheaper, or I'll get McRae cheaper, or I'll get Dunkley cheaper. It's like, that's fine, that's cool, go for that, but you're only going to get one of them, and that's presumed they don't, go over and above what their average price point is. You're only going to get one of these guys at that cheaper price. Otherwise, you're not going to catch them all. Yes, it's okay, we can't start with every premium, but if you're going, this is the guy I'm taking on, I'm going to get him on in the first 5 or 6 weeks, you're only going to get one, you're not going to get 4.
Absolutely. Look, and I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit. Like, we can also say, look, he's had such a history of knee injuries, and that's, of course, a concern. So you look at it from both sides of the table, but I just think, if he's heading into the season and he's named round 1 and he's only owned by, potentially 15 or 20% of the competition, to me, that's still a tempting prospect. He's one of the best fantasy players in the game. So, and it will be interesting as well to see how the rucks line up. Like, are we going to have a super value ruck at any point? Are we sort of thinking that there's little value in the ruck? So potentially you don't want to get someone that's on the cheaper side. So it's Tim English is a guy that I think possibly has a bit of upside to him, but he's almost priced now at the point where if he was, say, a forward, you would be thinking, well, I probably need to keep him at that price. Yep. So it becomes a very interesting debate and a bit of an interesting narrative for us to have heading into
it certainly does as you head into the year. Do I start him? Do I cop a potential little down, but know that I've got him for the year, and it kind of counterbalances it out? Or do you take, English as a player you mentioned, or some guys that have featured in the 50 most relevant, like a Sam Jacobs, who's at a good price, nice early fixture. He's a candidate. Nick Naitanui, probably more SuperCoach than the other formats. But again, both of those guys have shown they've got a nice history of scoring, and can they be that quick stepping stone over to Max Gawn for you to capitalise on that possible forecasted slow start? Who knows? But it is going to be a fascinating thing to see what people do, because he's got back-to-back seasons of 125-plus averages in SuperCoach and 110-plus averages in AFL Fantasy. And beyond Brodie Grundy, he's the only other ruckman I severely trust to get back within those reach of numbers. And let's be honest, if you don't start Max, chances are you're going to try to find a way to get him in at some point during the year.
Yeah, it's hard to see a world in which he's not a primary upgrade target. I mean, it probably would take something from one of the guys like Rowan Marshall maybe taking another step up.
O'Brien maybe, Witts, Goldie, but even then.
Yeah, it's hard to see it.
Yeah.
I think Marshall's probably the one who's maybe most capable of it, but it's very, very hard to see. I look back at the history of us playing the game, and Dean Cox was the last guy that was really solidly around those numbers for more than half a decade. And I think at the moment we're going through a period where we're going to have like probably 2 or 3 superstar ruckmen, and that's an exciting prospect, but it's quite unusual. So enjoy the next 3 seasons or 4 seasons of Gawn still at his maximal output, because he's one of the most exciting players to watch in the game.
Yeah, I agree. Look, the addition of Jackson through the draft, is great for the long-term prospects of the Melbourne Footy Club, but I don't see this having any immediate or drastic impact on the scoring of Max, that's for sure, and we've seen what Bruce does to Max Gawn's scoring. Let's talk about drafts, though, Ben. Keen to get your take on where he goes. The preseason injury may see him dip a little bit, because in SuperCoach, he was a genuine early first-round selection, maybe a late first round in fantasy, definitely on the turn in the second. Do you still see him going in those sort of positions, or does he drop back 5 or 10 selection positions in a draft now because of the injury?
No, in the draft for me, he actually doesn't drop down at all.
Yeah.
Because I see it as being a very short-term downside. Now, if you're concerned about him as a long-term injury concern, given he's had knee prospects, then maybe that would factor into the decision-making. But if you have those concerns, I suggest he's a non-selection for you, because you're going to be paying a first or second rounder for him. So if you hold concerns, possibly look elsewhere, but I don't really hold those concerns.
Yeah.
It's been super durable for the last 24 months. So, and this looks like a very minor injury. Has already been up and running apparently. So, all looks positive. I would be taking him after maybe the 6th selection in a AFL fantasy draft, and I'd be taking him very, very early in SuperCoach. Like he's top 3 type selection for me there.
Yeah. So most drafts, the common perception amongst the fantasy community is Brodie Grundy goes 1. Again, right or wrong, common perception is Grundy goes 1. Say you have pick 2 in a SuperCoach draft. Is Max Gawn a genuine option, or should you be looking for the Whitfield, McRae, Dangerfield, Fife types? What are you doing if you've got pick 2 in a SuperCoach draft, mate?
Today, I think I'd go Max Gawn.
Yeah.
Now, Whitfield's the other one that interests me. Dangerfield's exciting, but I think, he's started to just get a little bit older. He's possibly not going to produce what he had at his best. Okay. I mean, that might be famous last words,
sure,
of course, but that's just my feeling. But yeah, I think Max Gawn's probably the guy at number 2, because it would come down to him or Whitfield, and you really are scraping the barrel because they're both bloody brilliant selections. But I think I would land on Max. I don't know whether that's a unique decision or not, and obviously there's still a few days come around one. You might get a little bit excited by Whitfield dominating the pre-season competition, but that would be my sort of call. What about you, MJ?
I genuinely think it's a really fascinating selection. If I'm in a draft this year, I either want pick 1 or pick 9 or 10, to be honest. I don't want to be anywhere in the middle of that, but in a SuperCoach pick 2, yeah, I think Gawn has to be a serious consideration. Last year, in terms of how he's averaged, he was the second highest average player overall last year and 5th for total points, even missing a game. So, look, he's right. He's got to be right in that consideration as a number 2 pick, because, again, you're going to keep him for the year. So, yeah, I think it's a genuinely good call, man. Appreciate your thoughts as we've chatted about Big Max.
Thank you, MJ.
If you want to go and check out the article on Maximum or any of the other players in the 50 most relevant, it is online now at coachespanel.tv. The links for where you can get early access content and a heap of other things for our Patreon supporters, that is also at coachespanel.tv. There's still a few sneaky spots too in a special draft league we're running. If you want to find all the details, it's all at the website. 4 players left to go in the 50 most relevant. You can probably count who they are and figure it out. But have you got the order correct?